The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Bragg, North Carolina, as Captain Sarah Mitchell walked toward the training grounds. Her boots hit the pavement with steady precision, the same way they had every single day for the past 12 years. Nobody noticed her anymore. That was the point, really. Stay quiet, do the job, don't make waves. That was the unofficial motto for women in the military, at least the one nobody spoke out loud. Sarah had joined the army right out of high school at 18 years old. She was the kind of girl who didn't wait for permission to be brave. Her father, Captain Thomas Mitchell, had been a Navy SEAL. He'd passed away when she was just 16, killed in action overseas. He never got to see his daughter become a soldier herself. But his memory burned inside her like a constant flame, pushing her forward even on the darkest days. Now, at 30 years old, Sarah was one of the most accomplished officers on base. She'd led 3 successful operations. She'd earned a Purple Heart after being wounded in Afghanistan. She'd trained hundreds of younger soldiers. And yet, somehow, she remained invisible. Not in a peaceful way. In the way that happens when people decide not to see you. The 212th Battalion under Colonel Marcus Henderson had a real problem. Not with their missions. Their operational record was flawless. The problem was that Colonel Henderson couldn't accept that one of his finest leaders happened to be a woman. He'd been raised in a different era, when military leadership meant a certain look, a certain voice, a certain way of existing in the world. Sarah didn't fit that picture, no matter how many commendations she earned. Sarah's best friend, Lieutenant James Drew Patterson, was waiting for her at the briefing room. Drew was a good man, one of the few who treated her like an equal without making a big deal about it. He saw her skills. He respected her mind. And lately, he'd been noticing something darker happening around the base. "You coming to the meeting?" Drew asked, holding the door open. Sarah nodded, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. Her uniform was pressed perfectly. Her insignia gleamed. She looked every inch the officer she was. But looks only matter if people are willing to look. Inside the conference room, Colonel Henderson was already there, along with several junior officers. Sarah took her seat at the long wooden table. She'd learned to speak only when asked a direct question. Any other contribution was met with cold stares or, worse, was repeated by someone else and credited to them instead. Colonel Henderson began the briefing about a new training protocol. It was a good idea, Sarah thought. But it wasn't quite right. The timeline was too aggressive. The resources weren't allocated correctly. She had suggestions, solid, practical suggestions that would make the program better and safer. She raised her hand slightly. Colonel Henderson looked right through her and continued talking. Sarah lowered her hand. She'd learned this lesson 1,000 times. Her voice didn't carry the same weight as the others. It was as if her words dissolved the moment they left her mouth, disappearing into the air like smoke. 30 minutes later, Major Derek Carlson spoke up with nearly identical suggestions to the ones Sarah had wanted to propose. Colonel Henderson leaned forward with interest. "Excellent thinking, Carlson. That's exactly the kind of leadership I expect from my officers." Sarah stared down at her notebook. She'd written those exact points down 3 months ago when the program was first discussed. She had documentation. But documentation didn't matter when nobody was looking. After the meeting, Sarah walked alone through the base. The afternoon was hot, humid, the kind of North Carolina heat that stuck to your skin. She found herself at the small memorial garden near the headquarters building. This was where they honored the fallen. She came here sometimes when she needed to feel close to her father. His name was on the wall. Captain Thomas James Mitchell. The inscription below it read, "He gave everything for those he loved." Sarah pressed her palm against the engraved letters. Her father had died believing his daughter would have a better life. He'd died believing things were changing. He'd died believing his sacrifice meant something. She wondered what he would think if he could see her now. Would he be proud? Or would he tell her she was wasting her potential by accepting this endless dismissal? That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment off base. She lived alone by choice. It was easier that way. No one to disappoint. No one to explain things to. She made herself dinner, a simple chicken salad, and sat on her couch with the television on but not really watching. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mother, Diane Mitchell, who still lived in their hometown of Wilmington, Delaware. "Hi sweetheart, just checking in. Your birthday is coming up next month. Are you planning to visit? I'd love to see you." Sarah smiled despite her heavy heart. Her mother was a retired elementary school teacher. She was the most encouraging person in Sarah's life. She called every Sunday without fail, always asking the same question, "How are they treating you, baby?" Sarah had stopped giving her honest answers about a year ago. Her mother worried too much. She'd already lost her husband to the military. Sarah refused to let her lose her daughter, at least not to sadness. She typed back, "I'm good, Mom. Work is busy. I'll try to get home for my birthday. Love you." But as she hit send, something shifted inside her. A small voice, her father's voice maybe, whispered a question she'd been avoiding: "How much longer are you going to accept being treated like you don't matter?" Sarah didn't have an answer. Not yet. The next morning would bring a new crisis, one that would finally force her to stop accepting the invisible treatment. It would force her to be seen. And the world would be watching. 3 weeks later, Sarah was leading a joint training exercise with the 212th Battalion and a visiting group from the Pentagon. They were testing a new rapid deployment protocol that Sarah had actually designed, though her name wouldn't appear in the official documentation. Colonel Henderson had submitted it under his own authority. The training field was a sprawling stretch of land 2 miles outside the main base. Early morning. The sky was still gray. About 200 soldiers were gathered in their designated formations, waiting for the exercise to begin. Sarah stood with the command team, briefing the visiting officials on how the protocol worked. She explained the logistics, the communication systems, the safety measures. The Pentagon representatives were impressed. They asked detailed questions, and Sarah answered every single one with precision and confidence. Then Colonel Henderson stepped forward. "Gentlemen, I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to showcase our battalion's capabilities. I've worked hard to build a program that really works," he said, extending his hand for a handshake with the senior official. The words hung in the air. Not a single mention of the officer who'd actually designed the system. Not a single acknowledgement that the woman standing 3 feet to his left had made this possible. Drew, standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably. He caught Sarah's eye for just a moment. She could see the apology there, the recognition of unfairness. But apology wasn't enough anymore. The exercise began. Everything ran smoothly because Sarah had built it to run smoothly. She moved through the operations with calm authority, coordinating between units, solving problems before they became big problems, keeping everyone safe. This was what she was born to do. This was her gift. Halfway through the exercise, something unexpected happened. One of the younger soldiers, Private Danny Chen, who was only 19 years old, suddenly collapsed on the field. He'd been pushing himself too hard, and the heat and physical stress had triggered a panic attack. He lay on the ground hyperventilating, his eyes wide with fear. The soldiers around him didn't know what to do. Some froze. Others looked toward their officers for guidance. Sarah immediately moved toward him, her training and instinct overriding everything else. She was there in seconds, kneeling beside the young man. "Danny, I'm Captain Mitchell. I need you to focus on me, okay? Look at my eyes. You're having a panic attack, but you're going to be fine. We're going to breathe together." She took his hand and placed it on her chest so he could feel her steady breathing. "Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out for 4. You're safe. You're with me. Daniel's breathing gradually slowed. His eyes became less wild. Sarah stayed with him, talking in a calm, steady voice, until the medical team arrived. The base doctor, Dr. Marcus Webb, came over and checked Danny out. He'll be fine. Just needed to calm down. Good work getting to him so quickly, Captain. But as Sarah stood up, brushing dirt from her uniform, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. Colonel Henderson was standing about 20 feet away, talking to one of the Pentagon officials. And he was pointing at her. Not in a good way. She could read his lips, emotional. Overreacting to the situation. Not the kind of composure we need in command. The official nodded. Sarah felt her heart sink. She'd just saved a young soldier from a serious psychological crisis, handled it with textbook precision and genuine compassion, and it was being interpreted as weakness. That afternoon, Colonel Henderson called Sarah into his office. The office was large and formal, decorated with military commendations and photos of the colonel with various important people. Sarah stood at attention in front of his desk. He didn't ask her to sit. "Captain Mitchell, I want to talk to you about what happened this morning." "Of course, sir." That was an excessive response to a routine panic attack. "We handle mental health situations differently in this battalion. By running over there like some kind of emotional support animal, you drew unnecessary attention to the soldier's condition. You embarrassed him." Sarah's jaw tightened. "With respect, sir, I got the soldier stabilized. The doctor said he was fine. The issue," Colonel Henderson said, leaning back in his chair, "is that you don't have the temperament for command. Women tend to be more emotionally reactive. That's just biology. It's nothing to be ashamed of. But it means you should probably consider roles that better suit your natural inclinations." The words landed like physical blows. "Sir, I don't believe my gender has anything to do with my ability to lead. And I respectfully disagree with your assessment of this morning's actions. I followed proper protocol for a soldier in psychological distress." Colonel Henderson's face darkened. "You disagreeing with me is exactly the problem, Captain. You question authority. You make things difficult. And frankly, I'm tired of dealing with it." He stood up and walked to the window, turning his back to her. "I'm recommending that you be transferred out of this battalion. You'll have a desk job at headquarters. It's a lateral move, so your rank stays the same, but you won't be in a leadership position anymore." Sarah felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. "Sir, I've earned my position here. I have an excellent record. I don't deserve this." "You deserve exactly what I'm giving you," he said, not even turning around. "And if you have a problem with it, you can take it up with the Admiral. But I don't think that's going to end the way you hope." This was a threat. A clear, unmistakable threat. The Admiral was Colonel Henderson's friend. Everyone knew it. If Sarah complained, it would be her word against his. And she'd already seen how that turned out. Sarah left his office with her mind spinning. She felt sick. Not because she was moving. Not because of the demotion from command. But because of the injustice of it. Because a year of good work could be erased by someone who couldn't stand the thought of a woman in power. Because she was back to being invisible, worse than invisible. She was becoming invisible while being punished. She went directly to the barracks where the younger officers stayed. Drew was in his room, reading a report. "It's done," Sarah said without preamble. "He's transferring me out." Drew's face went pale. "No. He can't." "Sarah, that's not right." "Right doesn't matter here," Sarah said, and hearing her own words, she knew they were true. Right didn't matter. Justice didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was what the people in power wanted. She sat on his bed, and for the first time in years, she let herself cry. Just a little. Just enough to acknowledge the weight she'd been carrying all these years. I'm going to fight this, she said, wiping her eyes. I'm going to go to the Admiral. I'm going to file a formal complaint. That's brave, Drew said carefully. But you should know. Henderson has been doing this for years. There have been other complaints. They all got buried. Then it's time to stop burying them, Sarah said. She didn't know it yet, but her decision to fight would set off a chain of events that would shake the entire base. And she was about to discover that she wasn't as alone as she thought. Sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to be invisible for everything to change. Sarah spent the next 3 days documenting everything. Every instance of her ideas being taken by others. Every time she'd been passed over for promotion. Every comment Colonel Henderson had made about women in leadership. Every single time she'd been made to feel small. The documentation was exhaustive. It was also devastating. Reading it all together made her realize just how systematic the treatment had been. This wasn't random. It wasn't personal dislike. It was a pattern. A deliberate, intentional pattern of undermining and dismissing her simply because of her gender. On the 4th day, she requested a meeting with Admiral James Richardson, who oversaw the entire base and all the battalions under it. The Admiral was 72 years old, a legendary figure in the Navy, a man who'd served for 50 years and earned the respect of everyone who worked with him. Sarah had no idea what his reaction would be. But she knew she had to try. The Admiral's office was on the top floor of headquarters, with windows overlooking the entire base. Sarah arrived in her dress uniform, her documentation organized in a neat folder. She was nervous. Very nervous. But she was also clear about what she needed to do. Admiral Richardson was waiting for her. He was a tall man, even in his age, with white hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. "Captain Mitchell. Come in. Sit down." Sarah sat across from his desk, holding the folder in her hands. "I've been told you have some concerns about your reassignment," the Admiral said. "Yes, sir. With respect, I believe the reassignment was not done fairly. It was done in retaliation for me speaking up in a meeting and standing up to Colonel Henderson's orders." The Admiral leaned back in his chair. "Tell me everything." For the next 40 minutes, Sarah laid it all out. She was calm and professional, but she held nothing back. She explained the pattern. She showed the documentation. She talked about the ideas that were taken from her, the opportunities that were given to less experienced male officers, the dismissal she faced every single day simply for being a woman who was good at her job. Admiral Richardson listened without interrupting. When she finished, he opened the folder and went through the documents carefully. "These are serious allegations, Captain." "Yes, sir. They are. And they're all true." The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You know what I think?" Sarah waited. "I think you should have come to me sooner. I think you've been carrying this burden alone for too long. And I think it's time for this to change, not just for you, but for every woman serving in this battalion and every battalion under my command." Sarah felt tears prickling behind her eyes, but she held them back. "Here's what's going to happen," the Admiral continued. "I'm going to open a formal investigation into Colonel Henderson's conduct. I'm going to review every personnel decision he's made in the last 5 years. And I'm going to talk to every woman who served under him about their experience." "Sir, that's not a question," the Admiral finished. "Captain, I didn't get to where I am by ignoring problems. And I didn't raise my daughter to accept being treated like this either. My granddaughter is thinking about joining the military. I want her to know that when she does, she'll be treated with the respect she deserves." He stood up and extended his hand. Sarah shook it, and she could feel the firmness of his grip, the weight of his promise. "You did the right thing coming here, Captain. The difficult thing. The brave thing. Now let's see this through." Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation was brutal. 32 women came forward with stories. There was Captain Elena Rodriguez, who designed an entire logistics system that was credited to a major who was later promoted on the strength of that work. There was Lieutenant Sarah Kim, who'd been told she was too pretty to be taken seriously as a combat officer and was repeatedly excluded from important briefings. There was Sergeant Martha Hayes, who'd reported sexual harassment and was told she was too sensitive for the military. Colonel Henderson tried to defend himself. He claimed it was all misunderstanding. He said women were just more emotional and couldn't handle the pressure of real command. He insisted he was a good leader and that his battalion's record proved it. But the documentation was undeniable. Admiral Richardson called for a press conference. He stood at a podium in front of the base, with media cameras rolling, and announced that Colonel Marcus Henderson was being removed from command, pending full court-martial, on charges of discrimination and creating a hostile work environment. The story exploded online. News outlets picked it up. Military analysts talked about it. And one particular detail caught fire on social media. A retired Navy SEAL named Captain Robert Turner, who had served with Sarah's father, Thomas Mitchell, decades ago, posted a message online that went viral. "I served with Tom Mitchell. I know his daughter, Sarah. Tom died believing his sacrifice meant something. He died believing things would get better. Sarah never gave up on that belief. Today, she just made Tom's sacrifice mean something for thousands of women who will now be treated with the respect they've earned. Tom would be so damn proud." The post got 2 million views in a day. Media outlets wanted to interview Sarah. She did a few carefully, talking about her father, about the importance of treating all soldiers as equals, about the strength it takes to stand up when standing up is hard. But the most powerful moment came when Admiral Richardson made an unexpected announcement. He appointed Sarah as the new commander of the 212th Battalion. Not a lateral position. Not a desk job. A command position. The same position Colonel Henderson had held. At the ceremony, Admiral Richardson stood beside Sarah in front of the entire battalion. "Captain Sarah Mitchell," he said, "has more integrity, more tactical skill, and more genuine concern for the soldiers under her command than anyone I've met in my 50 years of service. She will be an outstanding commander. And if anyone has a problem with that, I suggest they think about transferring, because I'm not tolerating it." He turned to Sarah and saluted her. The entire battalion saluted. Sarah stood at attention, her uniform pressed perfectly, her insignia shining, finally, visible to everyone around her. Not despite her womanhood. Not in spite of her sensitivity and strength and capacity for caring about people. But because of who she was. Exactly as she was. That night, she called her mother. "You won't believe what happened," she said. "Try me," her mother replied. "I've been watching the news. Baby, I'm so proud of you." "Dad would be too," Sarah said. "He absolutely would," her mother agreed. "He absolutely would be." Being the new commander of the 212th Battalion was both a victory and a new kind of challenge. Sarah discovered quickly that winning the battle didn't mean the war was over. There were still obstacles to overcome. There were still people who resented her. And there were personal costs she hadn't fully anticipated. The first week was the hardest. Some of the older officers under her command, men who had served with Colonel Henderson, who had benefited from his system, greeted her with a kind of cold distance. They followed her orders, because they had to, but the warmth that normally came with a new commander was absent. It was as if they were mourning the loss of their previous leader, mourning the end of an era where the rules had favored them. Major Derek Carlson, the man who had stolen her ideas in that meeting weeks ago, was still stationed at the base. He had a choice to make when Sarah took command. He could transfer out, or he could stay and report to her. He chose to stay. On her second day as commander, Sarah was in her office when Carlson knocked on the door. He looked uncomfortable, which was fitting. "Captain, Commander Mitchell," he started. "I wanted to apologize for the meeting where I presented your ideas as my own. I wasn't thinking clearly. I wanted to impress Colonel Henderson, and I took the easy path. Sarah listened without speaking. I wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong that was. And I wanted you to know that I'm a better officer than I showed in the past few weeks. Sarah considered him carefully. Major, I appreciate the apology. But let me be clear about something. The easy path is gone. In this battalion, we operate with integrity. We give credit where credit is due. We listen to everyone's ideas, regardless of who they come from. If you can do that, you're welcome here. If you can't, then this might not be the right place for you. I understand, he said. And I'll do better. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here now. This battalion is already better. You fixed something that was broken. After he left, Sarah sat at her desk and allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Change was happening. Real, deep change. But there were other challenges brewing, challenges that had nothing to do with Colonel Henderson or his supporters. 3 weeks into her command, Sarah was notified that she was being audited by the Pentagon. It was routine, they said. Just standard oversight. But the timing was suspicious. Admiral Richardson thought so too. They're looking for any reason to undermine you, he told her during a private meeting in his office. The military is full of good old boys who don't like seeing the order of things change. Some of them work in the Pentagon. Expect them to scrutinize everything you do. The audit was thorough. They reviewed her decision-making, her expenditures, her personnel assignments. Everything. It took 6 weeks. And in the end, they found nothing. Not a single irregularity. Sarah's command was by the book, professional, and effective. During this time, Sarah also had to deal with a personal tragedy that would have crushed her if she hadn't had the strength of her convictions to hold her up. Her mother had a stroke. She got the call on a Tuesday afternoon. Her mother was in the hospital in Wilmington, Delaware, and she was stable, but they didn't know the extent of the damage yet. Sarah requested emergency leave. Admiral Richardson approved it immediately. She drove to Delaware in her own car, pushing the speed limit the entire way. The drive gave her time to think, time to pray, time to feel the weight of every decision she'd made that had kept her away from home. She'd missed so much time with her mother over the years. So many visits postponed because of duty. So many holidays spent alone in her apartment rather than traveling home. She'd convinced herself it was necessary, that her military career was too important to set aside. But sitting in that hospital room, watching her mother sleep in the bed, hooked up to monitors and IVs, Sarah wondered if she'd gotten her priorities backwards. Her mother survived the stroke. Her recovery would be long, but the doctors said she would eventually regain most of her function. Sarah took another 2 weeks of leave to help her get settled in physical therapy and home care. One afternoon, sitting with her mother on the porch of their family home, Sarah said, "I've been thinking about taking more time off. Being here. Helping you recover." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Absolutely not. You have a job to do. You have people counting on you. I'm going to be fine. And honestly, baby, if you stayed here because of me, I'd worry the entire time that you weren't where you needed to be. Don't do that. Don't give up anything for me. Live your life fully. Do your job. Be the leader those soldiers need you to be. But. No buts. Your father wouldn't want you to sacrifice your dreams out of guilt or obligation. He'd want you to soar. And that's what you're doing now, finally. Don't stop." Sarah returned to Fort Bragg 2 weeks later with a different perspective. Yes, she missed her mother. Yes, she would continue to worry about her recovery. But she understood now that the best thing she could do for her mother was to keep moving forward, to honor her father's memory by being exactly the kind of leader he would have wanted his daughter to be. The battalion welcomed her back with genuine warmth. The soldiers had felt the difference in the command structure during her absence. They'd seen how her leadership style created trust and transparency. They'd watched her stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. And now, when she walked across the base, they noticed her. They saw her. After one of her daily staff meetings, Lieutenant James Patterson stayed behind. "I wanted to talk to you about something," he said quietly, closing the door to her office. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "I wanted to ask you to dinner." Not as a fellow officer. As a man asking a woman he cares about very much out on an actual date. Sarah was quiet for a moment. She'd always known Drew had feelings for her, but they'd both been careful to maintain professional boundaries. "I appreciate that, Drew. And I care about you too. But I think for right now, I need to focus on my command and on my mother's recovery. Maybe in a few months, when things have settled down, we could talk about this again." He nodded, respecting her answer, not pushing. That was one of the things she appreciated about him. He saw her as a person first, a leader second, and a woman somewhere in between. Not a threat. Not a token. Just a person. As spring turned to summer, the 212th Battalion transformed. Women were promoted based on merit. Ideas were credited to the people who had them. The work environment became one where people didn't have to hide parts of themselves to be respected. Not everything changed overnight. Change never does. But it started. And it started because one woman decided she was worth fighting for. 6 months after taking command, Sarah was called to Admiral Richardson's office for what she thought would be a routine progress meeting. Instead, she found the Admiral sitting at his desk with a look of satisfaction on his face. "Close the door, Captain," he said. Sarah did, immediately alert to the serious tone. "I'm announcing my retirement next month. After 52 years of service, it's time for me to step down and let a new generation lead." Sarah's heart sank. Admiral Richardson had been her greatest ally. His support had been the bedrock of everything she'd accomplished. "I want you to know," he continued, "that whoever takes this position is going to have a file on their desk on day one. That file is going to contain documentation of everything that happened here, everything you accomplished, and everything that needs to continue. I'm making sure that the next Admiral understands the importance of the changes we've made." "Thank you, sir." He held up his hand. "I'm not finished. I've also spent the last month making phone calls. I've talked to people at the Pentagon. I've recommended someone to take my place. Someone I trust to carry this work forward." He stood up and walked to the window overlooking the base. "You know what surprised me most about you, Captain Mitchell? It wasn't your tactical skill or your intelligence or your integrity. Those things I expected. What surprised me was your grace. Even when you were angry, even when you had every right to be furious, you never lost your compassion. You never became like the people who hurt you." "Compassion isn't weakness," Sarah said quietly. "No," the Admiral agreed. "It's the opposite. It's the strongest thing a person can have. And it's the most valuable thing a leader can bring to this work." 2 weeks later, Admiral Richardson held a press conference. The media showed up expecting a retirement announcement. What they got was more than that. Admiral Richardson stood at a podium with Sarah standing beside him, both in dress uniforms. "I'm announcing today that I will be retiring at the end of this month. But before I go, I want to address something that happened on this base that I believe is important for the entire military and the entire nation to understand." He explained what had happened. He talked about Colonel Henderson's systematic discrimination. He talked about the pattern of women's ideas being stolen and their contributions going unrecognized. He talked about the courage it took for Sarah to come forward. "But I also want to talk about what happens next," he said. "Military leadership isn't just about combat tactics and strategy. It's about bringing out the best in the people who work with you. Captain Sarah Mitchell has shown a remarkable ability to do that. Under her command, the 212th Battalion has had the highest morale scores in this region and an 80% increase in operational efficiency. This isn't a coincidence. This is what happens when people are treated with dignity and respect. He paused, letting the cameras flash. So here's the announcement that's going to matter: the Pentagon has approved a new initiative. Starting this year, every military branch will be implementing the protocols and leadership training methods that Captain Mitchell has developed. These methods are designed to create inclusive work environments where the best ideas rise to the top, regardless of who they come from. Sarah felt her breath catch. Furthermore, Admiral Richardson continued, "I'm pleased to announce that Captain Sarah Mitchell has been promoted to Colonel. She will be taking over my responsibilities on this base, working directly with the incoming Admiral to ensure a smooth transition." The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Colonel Sarah Mitchell. The word sounded strange and perfect all at once. That evening, Sarah received a call that made her cry for the first time since this entire journey began. It was Robert Turner, the retired Navy SEAL who had served with her father. "I wanted to be one of the first to call and congratulate you," he said. "Colonel. Has a nice ring to it." "Thank you," Sarah managed. "I wanted to thank you for what you posted online. That really meant." "Listen," he interrupted gently. "I knew your father well. We went through SEAL training together. He was one of the finest men I ever met. And when he was killed, I went to his funeral, and I met his family. I saw his little girl, and I remember thinking, that kid is going to do something amazing." Sarah was quiet, listening. "I was right. And your father would be so incredibly proud. I know because I'm proud, and I barely know you. But I know him. And I know what he would think of what you've done here." After they hung up, Sarah sat in her new office, the Admiral's old office, now hers, and she looked out the window at the base spread out below her. All those soldiers. All those people. She thought about her father, who had given everything for the people he served. She thought about her mother, who had always believed in her. She thought about all the women who had come forward, who had risked their careers to tell the truth. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out an old photograph. It was of her father in his Navy SEAL uniform, standing in front of a flag. She'd kept it all these years, carried it through deployments and promotions and moments of doubt. Now she placed it on her desk in a frame, where she could see it every day. The next morning, Sarah woke up and put on her dress uniform. She pinned her new colonel's insignia on her collar with steady hands. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw her father looking back at her. Not his face, but his determination. His belief in doing the right thing, even when it costs you something. His love for the people he served. She drove to the base early, before most of the soldiers arrived. She walked through the headquarters building and found herself in the memorial garden where she'd come so many times before, when she was invisible, when she was struggling to be seen. She stood in front of her father's name on the wall. Captain Thomas James Mitchell. "I did it, Dad," she whispered. "Not just for me. For all of us." Over the next year, Colonel Sarah Mitchell implemented the changes that would ripple through the entire military. Women were recruited and retained at higher rates. Harassment and discrimination cases were taken seriously. Leadership training emphasized respect and inclusion. The results spoke for themselves. The 212th Battalion became a model for every unit in the country. Young soldiers, men and women, requested assignment there specifically because they wanted to work under Colonel Mitchell's command. She became known as someone who brought out the best in people, who made them feel seen and valued. But the most powerful moment came on her first official day working with the new Admiral, Rear Admiral Patricia Chen, a woman who had fought her own battles to reach her position. "I read everything in that file Admiral Richardson left for me," she said, meeting with Sarah in her office. "I read about what happened here, and I want you to know that I'm fully committed to carrying this work forward. I'm also going to be watching carefully to make sure this never happens again." "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah said. "Thank you," Admiral Chen replied. "For being brave enough to speak up. For being strong enough to stand alone when you had to. And for doing it in a way that brought people together instead of tearing them apart." On the anniversary of her taking command, Sarah held a ceremony honoring everyone who had contributed to the changes on the base. She highlighted the women who had come forward, the soldiers who had supported her, the allies who had believed in her. When she talked about her father, her voice was strong and clear. "My father believed that a soldier's purpose was to take care of the people beside them. To make sure they got home safe. To make sure they were respected. That belief cost him his life, but it gave his life meaning. Every day I'm in this uniform, I'm trying to honor that belief. I'm trying to create an environment where every single soldier, man or woman, is treated with dignity. Where your ideas matter. Where you matter. Where the color of your skin doesn't determine whether you're heard. Where your gender doesn't determine your potential." She looked out at the crowd. "My father didn't get to see this day. But if he could, I know what he would say, this is what it's supposed to be like. This is what we were fighting for." That speech went viral. Again. This time not just in the military community, but everywhere. News outlets ran it. Parents of military-age children shared it. Women's organizations celebrated it. It became a symbol of what was possible when institutions committed to real change. 6 months later, Sarah was invited to speak at West Point, the military academy where future officers are trained. She spoke in front of 2,000 cadets, male and female, about leadership, about integrity, about what it means to serve something bigger than yourself. And after she finished speaking, a young woman cadet approached her. "I joined the military because of your story," the cadet said. "I wanted to know if it was possible to be who I am and still be respected. Your story told me it was." Sarah held the young woman's hand. "It is possible," she said. "And you're going to make it possible for someone else too. That's how real change happens. One person sees it's possible, and then they help someone else see it, and then those people help others. Before long, what seemed impossible becomes normal. That's the legacy we're building." Years later, when Colonel Sarah Mitchell retired from the military, she didn't disappear into private life. Instead, she became an advocate for military reform. She worked with the Pentagon on policies that promoted inclusion. She mentored young officers, both men and women, on leadership. She spoke at universities and community centers about her journey. And she always carried her father's photograph with her. In interviews, she would talk about him, about what he believed, about the price of standing up for what's right. She would talk about the women who had trusted her enough to come forward. She would talk about the importance of allies, the admiral who believed her, the friend who supported her, the mother who told her not to give up. But she would always come back to the same message: "My father taught me that your position doesn't determine your worth. Your character determines your worth. And if you have the strength to speak the truth, even when you're afraid, even when it might cost you something, then you have everything you need to make a difference." The story became legend in the military, told to new recruits as an example of what one person's courage can accomplish. The 212th Battalion remained a model unit. And Colonel Sarah Mitchell became the woman she was always meant to be: visible, valued, and victorious. Not because she became someone else, but because she refused to become invisible.